Well, hello everyone. Welcome to Sundberg-Ferar's virtual design conversations. You are with us for our 7th episode. My name is Linnea Myers. I'm an industrial designer by training, and here at Sundberg-Ferar, I also do our marketing and communications. Now, for anyone who doesn't know, Sundberg-Ferar is a full-service product innovation studio here in Metro Detroit. We've been here since 1934, and the first thing I want to do before we get started is run you through a couple of items so that you can get the most out of today. So the first thing is, if everyone can look on their Zoom toolbar, it'll be either at the bottom of the top or the top of your screen. There should be a chat icon. So go ahead and open up that chat icon. This is where we will be taking all of our Q&A today, and also where I will be posting lots of interesting resources and articles and cool ideas as we go. So you definitely want to make sure that you have the chat open, and we love to get your questions as we go. This is virtual design conversations, which we love to hear your feedback, get your questions, and answer them as we go with our speakers. So also, the other thing is I will post links to our social media in the chat box. If you could give us a like, give us a follow, we would love to see you. We also post all of our previous episodes on our YouTube channel. So if you're interested in that, that's definitely something you want to check out. By the way, we got tons of questions for you even leading up to today. So thanks very much for sending those in, and we will definitely include those as we go. But if we don't get to your questions today, please do feel free to drop me or Zivak an email, and we will be happy to hear from you and to answer your questions as well. And I will post our emails in the chat box as well. So without any further ado, I will turn it over to Zivak, and let's get started.
Awesome. Hello, everybody. Hello. It's so nice to again jump on this virtual design conversations, and welcome to my home. Isn't this amazing? We were just talking about this in the morning. Zoom is happening because of this COVID thing. We're not going to talk about that, but just because of that, I think working from home is growing on me. I'm getting a chance to invite people, the CEOs and the directors and VP of innovations into my home. I get invited to go into their homes virtually, in their kitchens, in their spare bedrooms. Sounds pretty nasty, but you are there. You can say hi to their kids, their pets. In a way, when we talk about relationships and understanding what's happening, I think this is a little bit, I would say a little bit more food for thought to understand, like now we can, in a way, bond a little bit more, understand each other's personalities, understand each other's, I would say, other values in life, and get a sneak preview of how they lead their own life. So that's pretty interesting. I see we will be starting with our first speaker at 12:15, and Doug is already on the standby on the backstage. A couple of things that we have seen in the last couple of months. Maybe 4 or 5 things I would like to cover pretty swiftly. One, good news. See, in a way, design studio, any good design studio will always be a canary in the mine. Means when things go down, the recession, we are the first ones to get affected. But things, when they start to build up and try to ramp up, we are the first ones to see that and engage that. And that's happening. Right now, we are seeing an tremendous, in a good way, amount of, I would say, proposals come in, the chatter, the responses of what needs to happen, what has to be done as we are now entering the 2021 and trying to somehow leave 2020 behind. So that's a good thing. Q4 should be good. Going into Q1 should be even better. So that's a little bit more of what we want to hear, and that's happening. The other part is, the reason it's happening also, the second part is, it's a same starting line for everybody. So we are now faced with completely different kind of an amounts of choices of what people can do with their changing sentiments, changing sensibilities, changing intentions, the carefree nature or the careful nature. So if you are a startup, if you are a medium-sized company, or if you are a big enterprise company, in a way, we all, or you all, if you are into those companies, are at the same starting line. There is no, in a way, legacy or hierarchy of what needs to be done, especially with the context of the pandemics we are going through. If you're a company more than 100 years old, maybe you might have learned that during the 1918 pandemic as such. But most of us, predominantly 98%, 99 people, are at the same starting line. So there is no incumbents in this, let's say, essential, newer, changing market area. Not in every market for sure, but it's nice to understand that if you want to go and take a little bit of risk, an iota of risk to go forward, we will try to make sure you have nothing else to worry about as such too. The third thing we are seeing right now is it's in a way it was difficult for the Q1, Q2, maybe Q3 also to actively invest into newer kind of programs. But what the things happened is making sure people are trying to find out the real way they can organically grow around their core product, right? Means we all know, let me grab one of my favorite things, not just the flicker, that the center itself is your core product, let's say a durable product, a physicality of a product. That's always been there. There's always an element of GUI on it. Most of the products nowadays would be having, not that they should be having, but there is a way of how you try to enhance that user interaction behind the glass. It might be behind an app also. The third part of that every product, I would say, cluster is the way you're using and mining the data of what you are doing. It doesn't have to be a sexy, shiny product. It doesn't have to have an UI, but you can still try to make sure you can use sensorifications to extract how it is getting really used in the world and use it for the next design research kind of an one point of data. So the real product, the UI on it, the data harvesting or twinning of it, and the last part is where we are seeing the growth in how to now design the product that you already own to be able to provide service to range of people. It might be contractors, it can be fleet managers, how to plan for the servicetization of the similar products. So you are already assuming owning an area, you have your uniqueness and compelling element of a product. Now try to think about how people can leverage it more and more further. So that organical growth is happening, at least I would say right now in the design world. And pretty soon we will try to see how it can be more and more leveraged as such. So it doesn't have to go beyond in doing something completely I would say breakthrough or systemic innovation or hello innovation. We would always love to do that, but maybe this might not be that time for most of the companies to do that. So the third part of organic expansion is really happening. And I mentioned sensorification. That's one of the six forces, right? I think we all know those things. It's the digitization, the electrification, which is happening a lot, and then the sensorification, connectivity, autonomy, and robotics. All those things are going at an even space, but within that, the sensorification can be applicable for literally any business that you are in. And there is a huge, I would say, give and take of how those forces work in and out, right? Means talking about robotics doesn't have to be a biped to come and help you out. But if you see, one thing is right now in warehouses or factories everywhere in the world, one thing that is stopping the factories is the humans. With humans comes viruses, and then comes the blockages and stops of what cannot be doing. So some of this factory 4.0, which is a little bit more automated and more robotic kind of culture is seeping in, or at least investments are going on how to make sure those things can be a little bit more machine controlled, not just machine learning, not just AI, but literally trying to automate more and more features, more and more elements, more and more tasks to do. There will still be human intervention. It's not again going back to the world to be ruled by machines, but in a way it is coming little bit true over there. And that's I would say betterment for keeping the economy open, making sure people are still getting their toilet rolls to be stocked. By the way, there is again a shortage in Costco. I hear that people are still buying the toilet rolls. That's some thing different going over there. The fifth and the sixth, I would say to say is the fifth is I think the companies in their philosophy who were always thinking of design as an investment rather than the companies who think design as an insurance are booming. So there are some certain companies and certain industries which are just going up just because of what's happening around in the essential world. But even in the unessential world, if you literally had used design innovation as a part of a strategic intervention in what you're doing, not design as decoration, not design as just trying to have an I would say aha moment in unboxing experience and all those things. Those are nice to have. Those really work when the other main framework really works. But if you are a company, if you are a studio, if you are a manager, if you are one of those kind of forward-thinking people, small, big, or mega companies who are always thinking as design as an investment, those companies seriously and sincerely are still making decently good, I would say, in their cash flow kind of in business. So design really pays a lot, especially in places or events that we are all going through. So I think the faith of design or the faith of industrial designers in their own profession. And again, when I say industrial design, it is again not just the product design. So we talk about objectified elements, but an object can be a device, an implement, a tool, a range of different things. But we know now design is very nicely used for design strategy, understanding the innovation strategy, which is not literally the corporate strategy, is actually arranging, learning, fragmenting the corporate strategy, and then putting it together in the way of information and innovation pathways, which some of them might be service, some of them might be experiences, some of them might still be products. Products are here to stay. They might have a different manifestation, but they will always be here and always be a part of who we are as a human species. Maybe two more things. It might sound heretical, and it is, but I think that's the way we are seeing it, how some of the companies that we are engaging are going forward. Brand is one. Sometimes people say our product has to be on brand. If you think that a little bit more and internalize it, brand is something that we all create, right? This is a brand, that's a brand pillar. Our brand is going to stand for this, this, and this. We are tenacious, we are durable, we are quality, all those elements that really make the brand manifesto. And then you try to bring it down to the way your products are going to be made. Again, products can be services too. But it is the time where it's now literally flipping the other way. We think and we suppose or we propose that your product has to be on the need rather than just on the brand. And that means is, yeah, you can still stand for your manifesto, you stand for your altruistic goals, you stand for what's the reason for existence for your company, but it has to finally solve a real need in the market. And that means the product portfolio not every time has to be in perfect harmony with each other. If you're solving your product family for this kind of an ecosystem, and if you want to go and solve the similar kind of an, I would say, deep root, I would say, causes, not just the symptomatic problems, but if you go and analyze the deep root causes over there, then if the context of that ecosystem tells you to design a product which might have a little bit different value structure, so be it. You're actually going to solve the actual need in the market rather than again an esoteric theme that we are going to create that this is what we stand for and we are going to look only through that lens. So again, don't take me wrong. It's still nice to make sure your brand is strong, but then it would be a right time for you to have a couple of more sub brands under your umbrella brand to make sure, okay, this is the one we're going to look at this. And for this particular element, it can be completely different while still being under the same umbrella company. And that's, I think, the way it's going to make sure you're really answering the wants, the helplessness, the aggravation, the frustrations, the pain points in the ecosystem, which are now way more than any. And we might jump into the last element as such, but I think we are perfectly on 12:15. So let me. I see Doug, you're right over there. Feel free to unmute yourself and have your video on, and let us welcome you on stage as such. Here we go.
So I was trying to unmute.
Nice to see you. Yep. Awesome. How are you
All
doing,
right.
Doug?
You can hear me, Shiva?
Yes, sir. We can hear you nice and clear.
You. And thank you so much. I loved your intro as well, because there's a couple interesting elements. Jivak already introduced me. You know, I'm a professor of industrial design and with a master's in biomimicry. So I do a lot of focus in the biomimicry area and doing some work with students and some of my own projects. I would love to just jump right in. If that's okay with you, Jivak, or is there anything?
That's perfectly okay. I have a question for you before you do that, Doug. You are into biomimicry. You are a professor of industrial design. You also work in sustainability. You have your own company. How do you manage this everything together? And you're always at the spearhead of all these four things.
Well, some people could say maybe I'm not managing it as well as I can, including my family. But yeah, you get to a point where you have to start deciding what you're going to get done.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a complex area. So and especially when I was taking the classes in biomimicry while working full time, it just really made a huge shift in my focus. At the same time, it made a huge shift in how I feel about everything around me. You know, taking a deep dive into this area. And interesting, just asking me just how do I manage things too. And one of the things I found getting into the biomimicry area is it really connected some of my other passions of kayaking, wilderness tripping, studying nature, studying science, and now combining it all with design. It really all comes together.
You are literally living the dream. Means I know we both know each other. Means I think I'm also way more inspired, and I use biomimicry and bioinspiration for who am I. So I think, yeah, without further ado, let's jump in, see some of the thoughts that you want to share, and then at the end, let's spare some time for Q&A from the audience.
Okay, that sounds good. Let me jump over. Whoops, let me go back here. Give me a second.
Yeah, no problem. And as Doug is trying to go with the technicalities over here, I think I'm just trying to remember when we met. I think it was 6-7 years ago. I think we were both on a certain conference, both as speakers, and there I had seen Doug speak about and just unfold his passion for nature. So I think since then we have been talking with each other about the way we should be inspired by the good things about nature. There are plenty of things, like right now the California fire. It's started maybe by humans, but eventually the raging fire, the tsunamis, and the earthquakes. There's so many things in nature that I would say we need to be careful of, but there's so many other things in nature that we should be really taking off from. So we are able to see your screen, biomimicry, and a nice cactus background over there.
That's right. All right. Thank you, Jivak, again. And it's interesting. I was thinking about a little bit about your intro, talking about technologies. And one of the interesting things just leading into this is the idea of oftentimes we think of technology as automatically meaning digital and electronic. And we are dealing with a new technology, but it's physical, tangible. However, we're using a lot of the newer technologies in the digital world to help us design and evaluate our product at the same time. So I'm jumping into the world of biomimicry, sort of, and one of the overarching principles is this idea of creating conditions conducive to life. And I often think about this as also creating conditions conducive to innovation. So how do we create conditions to inspire designers and inspire good work, as opposed to sort of a heavy-handed top-down principle. So this is a cholla. I have on the right, you'll see the skeleton of it, sort of the dead tree version of the cholla. And one of the things I like to start with something like this is thinking about context and ecosystem. It's hollow. It's sort of this weave-like structure. It's very efficient with its use of resources because the resources are very minimal in the desert. So you think about where a cholla has evolved, and it's evolved so they can use less cellulose or less material and minimal water plus store water. And at the same time, compare that to a rainforest, which has ample water, and so it can grow massive trees. So there's a reason these two things exist in their own ecosystem. And one of the problems we have in our own built environment is sometimes we just try and drop something in one place that really has no design intent for that place. And I'm sure you can all think of examples. And on the right is a salt marsh, a different ecosystem where the plants need to deal with changing tides and changing salinity levels. So sometimes I leave this part for the end, but I thought I'd jump right in, thinking this is largely a lot of designers, industrial designers. And one of the things we like to do is we call a reconnect. We have to get back in touch with nature in order to sort of learn and observe more. We're not just looking at the surface, but really thinking, looking deep, both literally and figuratively, of how does nature operate and how do different organisms evolve for their ecosystem. Looking at patterns, sort of the cycle, the pattern that flows out of this is somewhat based on the Fibonacci sequence, but it's also a little bit different in terms of how plants spiral out, and this pattern is repeated in many plant organisms and animal organisms. I get fascinated when I see patterns repeat across both the plant and animal kingdom. Thinking about, we did a project on desalination. I don't know if I can hide this thing. Nope. Let me go back page, sorry. Did a project on desalination and studying the mangroves. How do they live within this environment? How do they manage salt, and how do they filter salt? So is there something we could learn from how the plants live in salinated areas so that we can do desalination with less energy? Because right now it's a highly energy intensive process. So there was an event at the Cleveland Metro Park Zoo, and they opened their new elephant exhibit. And so this goes into something what we call eyesights, where I'm going out, we like to go out and study look at nature, but not just try and sketch what's in front of us, but capture the function. What are we looking at? And so what are we really understanding from what we see? The interesting thing here is at this opening event, I didn't bring anything, a sketchbook with me. And then all of a sudden we had this chance to walk around and I realized I needed something to draw. And so their gift shop was open and they have books they were selling that were made from elephant dung. So it's elephant dung paper. So I love the fact that I could go buy an elephant dung book and then go in and sketch the elephants. And just looking at, and so these was really, again, I feel I'm more like a field biologist, kind of studying what's going on, noticing that the eyes are pointed down at 45 degrees, looking at the sort of the minor and the major flexation points in the trunk, how giant the brow is, and how similar the trunk and the mouth are. So some of the things that we let our brain get in the way, we don't learn to step back and truly observe. And I really got a lot out of just like doing these sort of biological sketches. This is from some of the classes we took where we did remote trips in our biomimicry studies. On the left is a friend of mine, Sarah El Said, from Cairo, and I think she's now working on a PhD at Arizona State in biomimicry, where we're out. We did a 4-day kayak camping trip as part of the class. And on the right, just, I love to see the beauty in the mundane. Look at barnacles, dandelions. Most people think of the dandelions as a nasty weed, but boy, it can really be beautiful. If you look at the efficiency of its structure, you can study all these really simple organisms and learn from them. This is another case where we were in Montana in the mountains, and I got in a canoe and went over and I was starting to sketch the cattails, and I was noticing the color changing as the wind was blowing. And as I looked at it more and more, and I finally realized the color was changing because the cattails are twisting as they grow. And this is a pattern common in nature. And I wasn't aware of this before, but just by looking at it and trying to sketch it, I realized the greens were constantly changing with the wind. The other thing I learned is on the right, you'll see there's a lot of, you can open up a science book and learn cattails live in a certain depth of water, like 1 to 3 feet. Well, I almost learned the real hard way on this one. I was in the canoe and stepped out at the edge of the cattails because I wanted to pull one out so I can go back and dissect it. But I stepped just beyond the reach of that 3-foot level, and my foot barely caught the edge. It really dropped down a lot, and I was so like 2 seconds away from just being totally underwater. And to me, the difference, now I have a total respect for where the cattails stop, be careful about water depth, which I would not have taken away if I just read it in a book. This one was based on a story from, I think, Sabrina Schweier, who writes about plants in Akron. And she was answering some questions for someone saying, hey, I was trying to grow my irises and they didn't blossom this year. So I moved them to this other spot and they didn't blossom there either. So I moved them to another spot and they didn't blossom there either. And so she sends this reply back in the paper to the person, said, leave them be. You know, they need to evolve. They need to develop. They're not going to blossom in the first year. And so there's something we talked about at Great Lakes Biomimicry, like this idea of letting things develop and don't expect certain outcomes right away. We have to understand their needs. And when the plant is sufficiently stable and has a nice roots, then it can propagate. This one, I always enjoyed this picture because it was one I took in Costa Rica during our studies. We got right up close to a golden ore weaver spider. And here you can see the ultraviolet webbing at the 4 corners. It's meant to, the hypothesis is it's meant to detract birds so birds don't fly through and destroy their web. But while I was looking at it, all of a sudden it disappeared because I was only a few feet away, and it caught an insect, hit the web, and in a matter of 3 seconds, the spider was over. Actually, in about a second, it was over wrapping up the insect. So I caught it mid-wrap. And as soon as it was done, it was back to the center, a total of like 4 or 5 seconds. So you need to be out there observing to catch some of these moments like this. And thinking of an example, Ornilux is a company that took this idea of ultraviolet reflection and embedded it in glass. So for tall skyscrapers in the urban environment, from the inside, you will not see this pattern. From the outside, birds can see it. And so what they found is they've reduced bird strikes by as much as 90% in some of these areas, because the birds are now not just seeing a reflection of the sky and flying into the windows. So simple observations like this in nature can lead to a whole new product. And one of my favorites is also about the humpback whale. And again, thinking about context that I mentioned earlier with the cholla, the cactus. Humpbacks feed differently than a lot of other whales and a lot of other fish in general, and they make these bubble nets, and they'll dive deep and blow bubbles. It'll come up, and what they're doing is corralling herring or krill, depending on the environment, if they're northern or southern. And the tighter the circle they can swim, the better bait ball they're going to make, and they're going to get they're going to feed better, they're going to grow stronger. And so what that led to on the humpback is that's why they have bumps or tubercles on the front of their fins. And it's one of those things that Dr. Frankie Fish was a marine biologist that saw this. And actually the story goes that he saw it on a sculpture and he thought it was wrong, even though he's a marine biologist. And he went back and studied, because even though he's seen them and we've all seen them, in our mind, we think of the bump as being on the back, because there's no bumps on the front. And so he spent many years studying this and working with some specialists at Duke, and I think also at Harvard. And as it turns out, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but just by having the bumps, it creates vortices that actually reduce drag. So the smooth fin has more drag on it and separation than the bumps do. And so with less drag, he can tilt his fin a little bit tighter and make a tighter circle and eventually feed better. So it's one of these things that there's so many things we discover that are just counterintuitive in nature, and we realize we've had it wrong all along. So this is one of those. This is a company, what is it, Enviro-North in Canada, that is using, so Whale Power will license their technology to companies. So these are like large industrial fans, airplane hangars, or industrial farms. And when they went with this Whale Power leading edge, it's all about having a better leading edge. They found that they reduced the fans from 10 blades to 5. So they cut the blade number itself in half. Because of that, there was a lot less weight. They went with a motor that was about half the size. So they saved a lot of materials, they saved manufacturing, and they're saving energy. Some companies are saving another $1,000 a year just on their electric bill, because it's so much easier. And by the way, it's also moving the air more efficiently. So these are when you get these win-win-win situations. And Jivek, you had mentioned sustainability early on, which is really where I got into biomimicry. But really, sustainability is a subset of biomimicry, because nature is inherently sustainable. It's inherently efficient, or it has backup plans. So this is, and it also makes a beautiful case. I did a tour of the Rydell helmet factory, and they had one of these in there. And I think it makes for a beautiful sculpture effect as well. So I'll show you a little bit about this project, and then I'll walk you through another one that I've been working on. So this is about paddle design. When I first got into biomimicry, I was actually looking at. Yes.
Doug, before we go into a case studies kind of thing, you mentioned the Fibonacci numbers in the animal kingdom also. Can you name some example? Because I'm a little bit at a loss to understand. I always saw that in sunflowers and plant kingdom, but not in the.
Well, you can see it in the nautilus shell.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, and other shells will have that.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
And so I'm not thinking of some other examples right off the bat, but
that makes sense. That makes sense.
Yeah. In fact, there was a section I'm not showing today where I actually show the nautilus shell, but that's a different PowerPoint. So I was actually being interested in paddle sports and kayaking. I was working on some new shaft designs, a better way to hold the paddle. And I thought, well, if I want to learn something about biomimicry, let me start doing some research into how to design a blade better. Because at the time, I just figured there had been professionals working on this, so they had it solved. And so this gets into that area of what problem are we solving? And I'll talk about that a little bit more. So I talked to a lot of people in biomimicry saying, wow, I want to design a better kayak paddle. What should I look at? And things like the sailfish, tuna, all kinds of, fish. They think of the fast swimmers, dolphins, I look at it thinking, no, that's not really it. That's not the problem. These fish swim fast, but that doesn't mean they'll make a good kayak paddle. And so I have to understand the problem. The thing about a paddle, whether it's a stand-up paddle board or a canoe, the paddle sticks, everything else moves. So I want something with grip, like a basketball player in a shoe. And a good way to think about it is anybody who's watched rowing or rowing events, they leave this footprint, right? So the smaller the footprint, the less the blade is moving and everything else is moving around it. It's almost as if you're paddling in thick mud. So once you understand that, that's when you realize, well, no, there's really nothing a sailfish can do for me. But I started looking at other organisms, platypus, duck feet, all kinds of lab-performed swimming fish. And just I ended up probably reading about 30 different research papers and connecting with a professor at Harvard who shared some videos with me. And so it was really fascinating to just kind of try and figure out where in the animal kingdom are they really trying to create drag is what it's all about. And studying like this is the pectoral fin of a fish you see. And one of the things I learned in the research was I would look at this before and think, well, that's just an efficient way of making a fin. It's just a simple set of rays going out covered with a really minimal membrane. But it's really not like that. Their fin is more like our hand. It actually can move. I think I missed a slide in there. Okay, I left a couple of them out, but each of those little rays is like a digit for us, so they can actually shape their fin. And then I have some more research, but it's an ongoing project, so I won't go into it much more, but just that idea of I'm looking at different organisms than I would have before because I'm understanding what the problem is. So this gets into the biomimicry thinking process. And for designers, this makes perfect sense because it's basically a design process. There's a lot of people get into the field or are not used to a design process, and it takes them a while to understand it. And what we often think of as design research, maybe I'll take a little broader look at it and think of it as scoping, really understanding the problem. And those of you who've worked with clients over the years probably know that that's often where the first problem is. The client comes to you with a problem, but it's really not the real problem, or it's not the right problem, or it's not expressed in the right way. And we have to sort of understand what the problem is and sort of dissect it and give it back to them to even begin our design. So getting into that abstraction, understanding the function, then you get into discovery. We're looking at natural models. We go to places like asknature.org, going into the science paper world. There's like Web of Science and Web of Knowledge. And then also looking at other human solutions like we do in our design research today. And then use that to build a palette. Then you can start designing. Then you can start creating, but you have all this information in front of you, right? So this leads into a project we did with some PhD students in Akron and some design students and myself and another professor in Akron, just kind of studying. We wanted to do something with sports safety. And so it really kind of came into, we ended up looking at the hedgehog quite a bit, but we looked at several other models as well. And so this is sort of our big summary of the project, and I'll walk you through the steps a little bit. You can look at, we wanted to look at concussion in football. And I know, G. Beck, you sent me a message. Sorry, I didn't get back to you on that. But the first idea is you're not going to go to Ask Nature and say, how does nature solve concussion? That's not what nature does. So you have to think about what problem are you solving? And we finally sort of dissected that down to how does nature manage deceleration? And there's a lot of organisms that do that. So we go through like the different steps of scoping, discovery, creating, and then refinement. So in the scoping, we really had to dig in and understand the points of impact, what's going on inside there, what's going on inside the brain, how does the brain work? Because the brain already has some protection, but it doesn't have built-in protection for football. That, we didn't evolve to play football. So it has certain protections based on our evolutionary level, right? So when we understand this more, we kind of looked at the numbers, also developing a business model because we created a company to explore this further. And there's something called sort of inline or linear impact, but also rotational. The brain can spin inside the skull when you get these angular hits. So we use that to kind of say, how does nature manage deceleration? And there's a lot of organisms. This is where we would start. Thinking about bighorn sheep, ramming each other. The hedgehog, which falls out of a tree, foraging for insects, and it can roll up into a ball and walk away. A good one is a woodpecker. There's other things like a pill bug that can just wrap up itself. Many organisms. So I think I took 3 of these and just blew them up a little bit to give you a better idea. And we could spend time on each one in our project. With the bighorn sheep and with the woodpecker, they both had a problem that made it more difficult for us to use, and that is the sheep are usually coming at each other at a particular angle. They're not being surprised from the back or something. So there's a directional element, and that's extremely true with the woodpecker. It can take a huge impact, but only from one angle. And so some of that can become difficult to translate into how do I use that information? How do I abstract it? Where the hedgehog could fall and hit on every different angle. And so we kind of looked at the hedgehog a little bit more. We took that, but and even this case, it was more of a student project at first. So we kind of looked at a whole variety of these different inputs from the different organisms and how do we take them and abstract them. So none of these things look necessarily like a hedgehog, except for maybe 1 or 2 of them, some of them look a little bit like a bighorn sheep, but really we're looking at an abstract principle that we took away from it, like some of the sketches, and some of them even use water to dampen forces. So can we displace water? So these are just some early concepts that we were looking at in terms of a project. And then a couple of design students took those concepts a little bit further. Like here you can see 2 plates connected. This might be a little bit like a hedgehog, although it's a little bit different as well. So after that was done, a couple years later, some of us that worked on the project decided to resurrect it and build a company called Hegemon and explore it further. And again, we come back to understanding the problem, scoping, and abstracting the function. So this is a piece I put together to help. If we look at the hedgehog, we start to abstract. Now we get into a little more of the science, or this is a taxonomy to visualize. There's shape of the spine. That's part of it. The way it's shaped this way with the arches, it has disc in the middle, the overall shape of it. There's also soft tissue. There's muscles. So there's sort of an active system. And then there's also a passive system, the density of the spines and the overlapping nature of the spines. So we kind of try to spend some time trying to really think about what's going on, because all these things aren't designed just for one function. They're all multifunctional. So we have to really understand what is it we can learn from the hedgehog as a system and as the morphology of the spines. And here you can see more on sort of the internal morphology, the shape, the proportion. Some other members of the team did a lot of research and study into 3-point bending to understand, as we change this shape and profile, how does that change the strength, right? And then the pattern, and I spent a lot of time more on the pattern side rather than sort of in the lab side. And I think of some of the bowerbird's nest and the way the spines can overlap. They start to support each other as you fall, as they hit the ground. And a good way to think about it is you can all imagine jumping off a roof and just landing on the ground. And if you jumped off a roof and landed on a pile of sticks, it still might not feel great, but it's going to be a lot better than just hitting the ground. So thinking about how the collapsing of these spines are supporting each other and dampening that fall. That led us into some of the earlier prototypes. The bottom right is sort of a little more literal translation. We did a lot of 3D printing, and this was even a nylon print that was fairly strong, a very flexible print, so we could see how this shape moves as it gets bent. This is where we get into the technology of 3D modeling and 3D printing to see how can we emulate now. We're not going to recreate, like the bottom right is a recreation of a hedgehog, but this is in the center a little more of an abstraction, right? And then if we want to make it, we had to think about, well, we can't just 3D print this forever, because now it's going to have limitations in structure. So we have to think about how can we make it in a way that we can do sub-assemblies and put parts together. So this is one of the early versions of this. And one of the early prototypes where I actually 3D printed all of these with a soft, like Ninja material at a ThinkBox, a makerspace at Case Western Reserve University, and we put this them together as an early system. You know, after we went through, we're doing drop testing modules and systems. Excuse me. We simplified the pattern to 2 because we realized maybe we don't really need 3 directions. Instead of left, straight, and right, we just went left and right with a different offset. And now we can make it in 2 parts instead of 3, and it's just as effective. So this is one of those things that happen again as you get a little bit deeper, and then taking those modules and making a helmet out of it. So the complexity of going from a module to making a system was immense, as you can imagine. And the head form we have here is the actual head form used in the NOC official testing. We actually have a physical one as well, and we have the 3D model, so we could build our system around the test equipment. And building the prototypes again, putting this together. We were fortunate to find a helmet brand that was making a bunch of helmets in polycarbonate, which all the helmet shells, almost all of them are polycarbonate, but a few of them were being sold in clear as like a sales thing, but they were still the same material. So it helped us to be able to buy some of these on eBay and build our module, build our system inside of that, so we can shoot high-speed video when we're doing our testing. And so you can see here's all the parts in the upper left. We have a completed system and then built inside a helmet. So we haven't actually made our own shell yet. First, we're trying to do the impact padding zone inside a helmet. And this is set up on the official NOC test. You can see the special spring form head here. And believe me, the impact that these things take is immense. Without a helmet, it would definitely kill you. So we take what we learned on our first step and then realized those were flat modules and the head is curved. So we kind of look at the next step and say, how do we turn this into curved modules? And believe me, the level of complexity going from flat to curve is tremendous, and kind of looking at how the spines all fit and adjusting them to fit a helmet. And so these are 2 parts that fit together to create one whole. We have different sizes. So this is a smaller module that's in the front. Here's a large module that's on the side. And you can still see how we can make a subassembly to go together. And that leads into sort of our current evolution of the product. And you can see a helmet cut in half here, trying to get more coverage. We also have to study the impact zones, where the common hits are, and they test for the common hits. So even just moving the modules around, trying to get the best coverage becomes a complexity. We also were working a little bit with Corvid Technologies, who does a high-end FEA. They do FEA for the military and that. So we're looking at, once we get to this level, we can do some FEA analysis to sort of change the design digitally and not have to go through and do a full physical prototype each time, because that gets very time and labor intensive. Something's not moving. There we go. Now it's moving. So this one again shows the helmet next to the 3D model. That's the stage we are right now. This is actually, I didn't have a good picture of our current model, but I do have one behind me that I can show you. And with that, I'd like to open it up for questions. I could stop sharing if you want, Jivak, and actually pull a helmet out. And I'll leave kind of, maybe I'll show this slide, but I can share the slide with Jivak later. Just some good books leading into understanding how to approach biomimicry, and there's a lot of good information out there now.
That's fantastic, Doug. And yeah, it will be nice to maybe unshare the screen and actually see the actual helmet if it is reachable for you.
So I'm not sharing anymore, right? You can see me?
Yeah.
Believe me, I could actually do a garage sale of football helmets with what's in my basement now. But this one is our last full assembly where we put our modules inside another helmet. It's a little bit hard to see them because these have been beat up. I need to go back and polish them more. They've been through a lot of testing. Before we used them the first time, they were nice and shiny and clear. And another thing, since this has vent holes, we had to actually vacuum form and make a liner to fit inside it so our spines wouldn't get stuck in a vent hole. So there are a lot of steps we had to go through just to get that. This one is our earlier module, but you can kind of get a sense of just the work of sort of, there's an inside layer and an outer layer, and the modules are trapped in between. The benefit of the newer version is these are all one part and they were flat on the bottom. The newer ones are curved and they're two parts, so they're actually more flexible. It's a little thinner material, and right now we're in the process of doing injection molding a test part that we can do drop testing with, because up until now these are all 3D prints. These are the clip technology, right? So we actually got pretty decent numbers based on 3D printing, which sounds incredible with the kind of impacts in play. And so now we're doing the new step that we can do a drop test with actual injection molded parts, and we can compare that to a 3D printed part and sort of evaluate how much improvement can we expect in an overall system.
That's, once again, Doug, that's pretty beautiful. It means it's nice to be started in the world of real, the expansive nature as such. And
yes.
Then back to the understanding what needs to be observed, what needs to be connected, and then coming back to the real physical world. Yeah, I was going to ask you to do that. You look like a warrior. You look like,
that's right.
literally wings.
A little loose. I don't have all the head strap and everything on.
Oh, you look really like a warrior. Means as you're showing the digital files, I would say slides of your spines. Somehow I assume the distance between the spines would be pretty big, and the helmet would grow to be a pretty kind of an astronaut helmet. But looks like it is still a sizable size. Did you have to compromise on the space between the outer shell and the inner shell?
We actually took that very seriously from the get-go. We figured you got to think about the marketplace, and we didn't think we could come out with a helmet that was even a 1/4 inch bigger, certainly not a 1/2 inch bigger. If you had a 1/2 inch now, it's an inch overall, and it's just the players wouldn't want it.
Yep.
So we really took that as a restriction from the get-go to be within the standard helmet size. And so, but we did do a lot of work on testing different angles, different pitches between the parts, the different diameters, even changing things 1 or 2 tenths of a millimeter, so there's a lot of analysis we could do, but I think the overall helmet size would be critical. Now it's mass. Right now, this is too heavy, but we're trying to solve all the problems and get good results first, and then maybe we can take more mass out.
And it's amazing to see from the nature inspiration how a small hedgehog can lead into, can literally lend itself, as you said, saving about 500,000 concussions a year. And I think that would be just for the USA, right? It's not, it's predominantly played in the US. That's a pretty big kind of an, I would say, element you're doing to have moms and dads still allowing their kids to go to high school and play this amazing sport.
And we're actually looking at this going much further into all X game types of things. What is it? The cross or off-road biking, skateboarding, the rollerblade activities that they do. There's so many places. Bicycling. I think one of the reasons we really went into football first is we figured that first it's going to be expensive. There's a lot of technology to discover and resolve, and so that first products might be a little too expensive to try and sell to some of the other markets, but then you can learn to take the price out.
So that's pretty amazing. I think you are eventually trying to come to the market with a helmet, right? Means right now you're in the final stage of testing.
Or partner with a company, maybe not make the whole helmet, right? We don't need to necessarily manufacture a whole helmet, but we can license the technology.
That makes sense. And eventually this can be I would say, dispersed into lacrosse and hockey and maybe software.
Those are two of them high on our list right now. Yeah.
There are so many places where we still want to play those extreme sports, but still want to make sure we are saving our head over there. So coming back to the modularity as such, the modularity is, I think let's go back. Let's go and try to take some questions that are coming up from the audience. As such, I think I'll just go anti-chronologically. A question from John Arthur. Hey, John, how are you? How do you approach the process of identifying a problem and then finding solutions in nature, like versus studying nature and then looking for problems? That's a pretty beautiful question.
Well, so is the question, is it one way or the other?
Yeah, you can try to answer it from that
Yeah,
perspective.
well, the answer is yes. Well, some people will approach it from both directions. And then like at Biomimicry 3.8, they kind of talk about it as sort of inspiration, like inspired by design, or is it designed to biology? This audience, I'm thinking, is probably largely designers. So we look at it, I think of everything as what problem am I solving? Now I need to abstract that problem, like we said here,
Yeah.
and then go to, there is a website called Ask Nature. People can go look that up, asknature.org, and you can just ask the question, how does nature manage salt? How does nature manage deceleration? And think about the words you're using. And then you can also, sometimes that's a starting point. And also I'll just like type a sentence in and see if I get a hit on a science paper that was written in some other sites. But it's like we do any design project. We're researching other areas. We're looking at how have other engineers solved the problem we're doing? How have other businesses, markets solved a similar problem? And how can we learn from them and bring it in here? What we're doing is we're just adding nature to that list in our research. So I approach everything from the point of view of what problem am I solving? But other people, Velcro is a great example. I didn't show it here, but that was an inspiration, right? The scientist in, who was it, Switzerland, found these burdocks on his dog, and it's like he went back and said, hey, what can I do with that? Dr. Frankie Fish with whale power. He wasn't trying to solve leading edge issues. He saw this information and realized, hey, we can learn from this. So it can work both ways.
That's a great answer, by the way. So I would like to expand that question a little bit more. You are also in the world of, let's say, a consultancy.
Yeah.
If you are, let's say, trying to plan a proposal to write to a company and they come with you with such and such a problem, which might not be the root problem, might be a symptom. How do you influence or suggest the power of nature to be used as a decent time to do that? Like you said, you go on 4-day canoe rides, you do this and that. That will be, I would say, the collective wisdom you have in the background. But specifically for a company, if you want to, how do you propose to have them look at nature apart from other competitive forces happening in the market?
There's probably a couple ways to potentially answer that. And one of them might be, if you're doing a proposal for a company and they have a problem, you can write your proposal that you're going to include it, but does it matter to the client? Are you going to tell them, do you know up front everything you're going to look at? Do you sort of outline every tool that you're going to use? You might suggest it. It's one of those areas that might scare some people off because they don't understand it. And then they see, oh, it's just going to cost me money. So maybe you have to show them some examples, like how whale power is more effective. You need to show them some business case examples. Interface Floor did their whole series of carpet based on the floor of the rainforest. And now you see, when you see carpet tiles in almost any building, you don't see patterns matching up. You see abstract patterns that are kind of random. And the nice thing about that is it always looks right. You're not worrying about one tile being just slightly off, like what we used to do with wallpaper. So if you can show them some examples, if you can try it on a case, or you have to go in there and try and sell it to them.
That makes sense. I like the response from the audience. Every project should start with a 4-day kayaking trip. I like that.
Oh my gosh, yes. I can be a coach on that.
We should add that. Another question from Erica Avery. Hey, Erica, nice to see you. What has been the most challenging form of biomimicry you have studied and implemented into a product that you have designed?
Well, I haven't had a chance to do a lot of them. My paddle work is still underway, but I feel like that has some strong legs to it. To be honest, this understanding the spines and how to translate that, this is the most complicated project I have ever worked on. We've been working on this for a few years now because we're all doing it part-time. We don't have a full-time company, so everything takes longer. But the translation of what's going on in nature to physical, and because we're starting to use 3D prints at first, we really have to go to an injection mold to even know if the idea works, right? I can't think of another project I've worked on that I can't really evaluate the concept without an injection mold.
Yeah, it looks like really challenging. One more thing you mentioned, that there is sparsely in nature a feature which is not multifunctional. So there will be multifunctions of the spines and all those things. So apart from, let's say, this impact abatement or de-acceleration, as you rightly put it, how do you try to isolate those kind of functions and then try to maybe triangulate that with a hedgehog or something coming from the woodpecker or the battering rams? So you try to blend, or I would say mash in the biomimicry for 2 or 3 different flora and fauna?
So there's sort of two parts in that question. The second part I will take first, and that is that, yes, I don't really, now we're really focusing on the hedgehog here, but we really did look at, can we incorporate flexibility elements that we learned in the hummingbird, the woodpecker, or the multi-level of protection going on in the ram. I think of any project as really sort of pulling out abstract design principles from any organism that we studied, and can we combine them? Can they work together? Because we're creating, this is a new problem that in and of itself isn't found in nature. So now we're adding our own context to it. So absolutely, I think of most projects as combining lessons learned as abstract principles. I talked about pallet building. They all go on your pallet, and now how can these work together? Now I'm kind of forgot the first part of that question was a little different. If you can repeat that.
Yeah, no, trying to continue with this line of thought. When you say you're pallet building and trying to incorporate elements from different parts of nature, there eventually would be clash of something also, right? What is good for the avian species might be really worse for the marine species and reptilian or mammalian. So eventually you still have to have a kind of a scorecard to which will go and reciprocate, or which might be just complementary or which might not be complementary. Does that happen often?
I have to think about the way you're asking it again. I'll probably answer it a little different. We can look at organisms. If we abstract the function of what's going on, it doesn't matter if that species is living in a different environment. And I'll give you an example. I've done a lot of work also on river systems, urban rivers, environment. And so part of that research goes into studying ecosystems, not just organisms, right? And one of the things we learned about like redesigning bulkheads along a river is there's a lot of stress. A lot of stress is from land moving, pushing bulkheads in. It's not just protecting it from ships hitting them. And I had students working on this, and one of the organisms they came back with was a bison. Well, what does a bison have to do with a river? And the lesson was, how does nature manage stress? And the lesson was that the bison has a massive head. It's about a third of its body mass, and you don't realize it. And you remember there's a big hump on the back of a bison, and there's a large tendon that goes from that hump down to the head. And without that tendon and a large muscle, it wouldn't be able to lift its head, right? So it's managing mass and stress with this sort of remote tether. Now the point is, now you want to remove biology. Now I can forget about that I ever looked at a bison and say, oh, I can use this sort of remote tether to manage stress or mass in another place. I'm not trying to do it all right here. And if you think about that, that's done in suspension bridges and other places. Like, how are you managing things remotely? So the key is to, once you understand the lesson from nature, then set the nature part aside, remove the biology, and look at the design principle.
That's a perfect answer. In a way, I just sound like yeah, that makes sense. You're abstracting it rather than trying to, as you said, recreate or copy paste it.
Right.
Never happen. Trying to make sure how are they in their ecosystem trying to react to the problems or the forces that they have to endure, and then what they come out with it is going to potentially help in let's say our application as such. That's absolutely beautiful. A couple of more questions coming in, and I have other questions over here too. But I think let's take a question from Katie. How can I pursue a career combining biomimicry and design?
Well, it is a design. It's within the design field. And that's what I'm doing now, right? I'm incorporating it into teaching. To pursue a career, first of all, you do need to get some of the biomimicry and the biology education. So, and Biomimicry 3.8 has it. I've actually taught one of their courses for them. They have a biomimicry specialist course, or they have this biomimicry immersion program that I was involved in. It was a 2-year master's program. So you do need to get this education, like you're getting like the quick 1-hour version, but it takes a while to sort of understand the process and how to translate what you're learning from nature. And then there's no reason you can't incorporate it in everything you do as a designer. And if you're doing something with wheels as a product designer, you're going to look at all kinds of people who also used wheels in other places. And how did they solve it? Does that help you? So you can just, I think of it as similar to sustainability. 20 years ago, sustainability was this new thing, not really new. It got past the point that only a few people were talking about it. And people are talking about sustainable design, but really that should be part of everything we do, right? It's not just sustainable design. So now biomimicry should just become part of our process. So if you get some training in it and look at some of these books that I showed you, you can start to build it into your process. Then you become a more valuable designer.
I like that, as you mentioned in your I would say presentation also about nature is inherently sustainable, and there is always a backup to the backup plan as such. And I think that's what eventually it goes rise to, is going back to nature and coming again back from nature.
Mm-hmm.
So there is another one which might be on the back coattails of Katie's question. You might have answered the first part of it, but the second one is especially pretty interesting. I will still read the entire question. Do you think that biomimicry will become a viable design major on its own at universities in near future? Because the possibilities are endless, and I think you might have covered that. But the next part of that is especially working hand in hand with AI, artificial intelligence.
Right. I'm not active in the AI side thing, although I look into it some. It certainly can be relevant with AI, and I think that's just going to become more related to what lessons am I pulling out now? How can I advance from that? Maybe it's a little bit like us using finite element analysis on our modules. But I would say going back to 2012, I think the University of Akron started the first PhD program in the world in biomimicry. It was part of their integrated biosciences, and I helped them with that in the earlier stages because they needed a design presence as part of that. So that's happening. And Arizona State has some work in biomimicry. We've looked into the idea of, I think its place would be as a master's. There's a lot of designers. I think the most common master's degree among industrial designers is probably an MBA. But now you can go back and maybe get a master's in sustainable design. And I think a master's in biomimicry for design, I think would be a great place to really accent. That way you can focus because there's so much to learn as a designer, right? I don't know if I would do it as an undergrad element, but give yourself 2 years to go in deep and become a biomimicry specialist in the field of industrial design.
Yeah, it's I think means no matter what, we can't see AI happening in nature. There is no visualization of an algorithm or something, but whatever is happening is with the tacit knowledge it has gained from its last 4.5 billion years of evolution. So the connection to the AI world is pretty amazing.
And I think some of the follow-up speakers could probably address the AI side more than me.
Yes, and it means technically we are going to have, and this is for the entire audience. I still have one more question before we should let you go,
Sure.
Doug, and get Mark in. So our next speaker was going to be Jonathan Bogg. He had one of his family members a medical emergency, so he was going to continue this topic a little bit in the world of AI, and then we would have connected that. But he should be on our panel hopefully next month for the 8th episode. But we might not be able to touch upon that in the next speaker. But coming back to the element that you were saying about one of your friends in Cleveland area, the iris, the one who was trying to grow iris patches, like you said, the integration of the development with growth means I'm just looking at the growth or the development of any company. If you look at the genesis of any company, it starts with an idea, a startup garage kind of a thing. Then they go and raise money, come back, have one product incarnation, then little bit have a family of product, and then they go to the adjacent market and eventually become a small company, big corporation as such. So when you mention about the growth of, let's say, irises, and there is a proper element for it to flower or produce fruit, in the stages of a growth of a company in the business, is there any spectrum where biomimicry should be applicable more strongly than not at the nascent spaces? Would there be, can it be aligned with the growth cycle of a company itself?
Well, the short answer is yes, absolutely. And actually that question sort of leads to sort of the opening of a discussion that shows how broad we can use biomimicry as a methodology. It's not just a design tool. There are business people doing it. When I studied in the 2-year program, they deliberately set up the program with 4 designers, 4 biologists, 4 business people, 4 engineers. You know, it's an interdisciplinary study. And one of the books that I showed you from Tamsin Willie Barker was called Teaming, where she's studying the social insects and what can we learn from them about how we run a business, how we communicate. There's people looking at decision-making, again, among social insects and other elements, how ecosystems work, and applying it to the world of finance. So there's a lot of, I don't really specialize in the business case studies, but there's some interesting business case studies out there approaching it. And it's on that very point, you know, that you were making is, and that is, if we understand the abstract principle about how information is shared in something we call feedback loops, how can we apply that? And I often think about that going back to the recession that was induced by humans back in 2008, because a few organisms wanted to maximize their profit. They created havoc in the greater financial ecosystem, right? All the Wall Street really created a problem. And to this day, they don't understand it. If you talk to most Wall Street people, they're just looking in this business lens. But if you think about how an ecosystem shares resources, we need to learn to manage that. And again, there's other people working in that part of the field much more than I am. But one of those books I think would be a great place to start.
Yeah, and please send the image to Lanea. She can add that into the chat as we are going through, and eventually we can send it to our audience also. I know there's only so much time, but I need to have one question that's always not troubling me, but always keeps us alive. Means we don't need to go into the details of the 3 laws of nature, the conservation of nature, like the conservation of energy. Whatever they do is for sex and for food, and the last part is whatever. When I say they, means animals or the flora and fauna. They do is they typically are. The risk taking is very small in the world of thriving or surviving in nature. Let's say even if it is a lion or a bear, and they are on the verge of hunger, but they might not jump from a cliff. They might not go over a rapids or something. So inherently, they are not as much as a risk taker in the long slide of evolution. But coming back to our world of, let's say, product design or business innovation, the entire innovation as an animal species, this last 10,000 years or maybe last 200 years of industrial design and evolution is where we have started to pushing ourselves as human species to take some risk, right? Okay, we have to go and do that and try to experiment and iterate. But is that going, why sometimes, let's say you and me or Mark and John or Doug or Mark, everybody over here, we might be in that kind of crazy mutants who are thinking of risk taking, but how to, in a way, sell this kind of risk taking as an innovation to the business world, where the financial CEO or somebody else might be still in that last 4.99 billion years of non-risk taking kind of an element. Any shedding lights on this kind of an element over here?
That's a pretty big question.
It's nothing for you, Doug. You have to it all.
It's it actually opens up a lot of different thoughts. And one of them, when I think about how we behave on this planet, so now you're getting into social behavior,
Yeah.
right? And you might look again at the social insects, or look at the social animals like the apes, and you might start to study. And I think Tamsin studied like the bonobo tribes and things like that. There's a lot of different social behaviors in different organisms. And there are places where you might see risk taking, but it's measured. It's like they take the risk if they're really on the verge of starvation, right? So
Yeah.
depending on where they are in their own comfort zone, they might take a greater risk. Now, but we're into an area now that is really created social construct, and there's really very little, places to learn that much to the level that we've taken it. And one of the problems that I've seen is the fact that we still have a lizard brain, right? We're doing things in the last 200 years that are expanding and learning and changing and evolving 1,000 times faster than an evolutionary cycle can keep up with.
Yep.
So there is part of our brain that just can't absorb what we're doing or understand it, which I think gets to the heart of why some people still don't believe in climate change, because their lizard brain hasn't caught up with the idea that we can affect the planet. And if you go back only a few hundred years, we couldn't, right? It's only been fairly recent that we have the unfortunate capacity to really start to change the environment around us. So I think there's a reason for that. But getting into that, that social nature of risk taking,
Yeah.
that's a really interesting question. And I would probably direct that one to Tamsin Woolley Barker as well, in terms of that's an area that she has studied more. She's more of an anthropologist, and a biologist. And, maybe I'd take a good look at that book, and that might get into risk taking and rewards. And there's another, I'm thinking of another biologist, Julian Vincent, who did a lot of work on hedgehogs, but he's done a lot of papers and work on what he calls trade-offs. And there's a trade-off in every activity, whether it's energy, risk, reward. And so that would be a good person to kind of look up some papers on trade-offs. I think there might be something you can learn from there.
The good part is, if you know both of these speakers, we can continue this biomimicry discussion in the next VDC, trying to have one of them come here as you did, and tell us more about the social aspect, so we can talk about that offline. We can keep on talking about this, but somehow this has to come to an pause. I would not say an end. But thank you again, Doug, for being over here. Feel free to continue to be on the stage. Maybe if you want to mute yourself and unvideo yourself, that will be great. Please send. If you want to just share the screen still till I try to just conclude this, and request Mark to come in, at least put the screen on for the books so people can make a note. And
sure, I'll do that while you're introducing.
But thank you once again, and eventually we'll talk more about your car and the wine bottles in the back. Maybe we'll save something for the next time. Thank you. And
Thank you.
As we are trying to wind down from our first session, which was just beautiful. I should say, in a business term, I love Doug and his passion for nature, and always trying to be observant. It's not just seeing, it's understanding, trying to, I would say, really break it down into the significant parts, and then trying to build it back again, the analysis part of it, of observation analysis, and then putting those into different elements, connecting them together. I think as Doug was mentioning between the lines, it's not just connecting everything, connecting the right points to each other, and then building up those things on where we want it to go forward. It's casual walk in the woods is one. And I always try to think about, when I tell people about observational part of it, you right now go outside. By the way, in Detroit today, it's really beautiful out there. If you just go for a casual walk in the woods, you will just going for a casual observational thing. But if you go with an intention, like it might be bird photography, where you are really trying to see how much noise you generate or don't generate, and what you wear, perfumes and all those things, or if you're a hunter or any other things, then your senses are acute to understand those small changes over there. And then what you see is completely different. And that's what eventually comes down to the world of a design studio, or let's say talking with business people about like, yeah, I've been there, we have done that. No, 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 you have been there, but were you there with a specific microscopic lens to observe this, and this? And that's what comes out in the world of our design about observational ethnography, observational design research, trying to displace designer is never the user. Even though I am one of the user, I'm just one of the user. How to understand that collective humanity, at least for that demographics over there, and bring it back to the element. So thank you again, Doug. You can unscreen, unshare it.